Hello and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this first of Thousand Days lunchtime webinar. It's lovely to see lots of familiar faces and or names in the chat and more people coming in. My name is Sally Hogg. I am the Deputy CEO at the Parent Infant Foundation, and I chair the First 1001 Days movement. And I hope that all of you know what the movement is, but if you don't, we're a campaigning alliance of 200 charities and professional bodies who work together to raise awareness and drive change for babies and their families in the period from conception to age 2. We've been running these webinars for nearly a year now because we have such a rich wealth of expertise and experience amongst the members of the movement. But alongside working together to campaign to change, we also wanted to give people an opportunity to learn about each other's work and to share research and good practice. We do a webinar every month, and they are available on our YouTube channel. So for any of you who are watching today and think this is fabulous and I'd love to share it with colleagues or partners, you can find recordings of both this webinar and future past webinars will be on our YouTube channel. So I'm delighted to welcome Adrienne from the Fatherhood Institute to talk to us today. Adrienne's going to give us a presentation for about half an hour, and then there'll be some chance for question and answer. If you've got any questions, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, which is at the bottom of your screen. So rather than putting things in the chat, use the Q&A, and we'll make sure we pick up all of those questions at the end. And as people always ask, can the slides be shared? Yes, the slides and the recording will be shared at the end. So without further ado, I'm delighted. I'm going to turn my camera off and just listen very hard and watch what Adrienne has to say. Thank you very much, Adrienne.
Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here. And thank you to Sally for this. I'm going to share my screen now, and then we can get started. I hope I am. Yes. Here we go. Right, okay, lovely. So as Sally has said, you'll have this PowerPoint, you'll have the recording. So sometimes you're going to skim through the slides a little bit, just so that they're there, so that you know that those are issues. So prompting this is the publication of a new report by the Fatherhood Institute called Bringing Baby Home. But I want to look back at another report as well, which is Fathers in the Antenatal Period, so that we can get a whole look at the 1001 days. So the Fatherhood Institute, this is us. We are here. We work to build a society where the values, everything supports men to be involved fathers. That's what we're after, and involved caregivers. And we do 3 things all at the same time, which is research, policy, and practice, so that everything we do ties those 3 things together. And we're helped in this by the Nuffield Foundation, who have been funding us now for a very long time to pull research together in a research review and then make recommendations for policy and practice. And those reports are up on our website under the Contemporary Fathers in the UK section. And we've done stuff on fathers in lockdown. We've done stuff on fathers combining work and care. And then we're doing we've done the 2 reports that I want to draw on today. The first one, which was published in 2018, is called Who's the Bloke in the Room? And that's about fathers in the antenatal period. The second one, which is the one just published, is Bringing Baby Home, fathers in the first year after the birth. Now, Sally and I are going to start with something that we haven't done together before, so I hope this all works. We want you to answer a poll, well, 2 polls really. And this is the first one, and here they come. And so we want you to and Sally's gathering it all together. Then I'll give you the second question, the second poll, and then we'll discuss the results, okay? So we can see it coming. I love to see this. So what percentage of parents are in a couple relationship at the time of the birth? That means married or living together, cohabiting, married or cohabiting, or living separately but saying we're a couple. So it's where the father is in the major part of the baby's life. So let's go on to the next one now. So the next one is, let me give you question 2. Oh, can you put that away, Sally? That one. The second one, yes. We don't need to go on the next screen. So the second one is very similar. What percentage of parents jointly register the baby's birth? By that I mean the baby will have the name of both the mother and father on the birth certificate, so that when in life, it doesn't say father unknown. It gives you the name of the father as well as the mother on the birth certificate. So, okay, let's deal with this one first because we've got this here. So quite a lot of you, 29%, that's nearly 1 in 3, thought that under 70%, so about 2/3 of fathers, just over 2/3 of couples jointly registered the baby's birth. Now, if you believe that and you're a practitioner, what this means is you won't pay much attention to fathers because you'll think that they're not exactly a minority, but they're not very important in the families you work with. The one that chose the right answer here for joint birth registration is 95%. And only 8% of you got that. Now, if you think what that means, if you believe that 95% of parents jointly register the birth, you know they have to go together if they weren't married, to the birth registration place, or if they were married, either the father or the mother, quite often it is the father actually, will take the marriage certificate along. And then they can register the birth, which of course they have to do within the first 42 days. So that's a very interesting point there, that very few, more of you thought that 89%, but very, very few of you got the 95%. Can we have a look at question 1 now? Sally, is that possible? Which is where I asked you which percentage were in a relationship, a couple of, together as parents, not just registering the birth, but together as parents. Sally hasn't put that up. It doesn't matter because, again, very few of you said 95%. And
only 30. I've got the answer up. I don't know how to show, but 13% said 95%.
What percent? 30%.
13.
13%. Guys and girls, wrong. Okay, it's 95%. So if you take that down, Sally, I'm going to move on to the next slide, and which I can't do. So, yes, now I can, I think. Yeah. So I'm going to sum up. Can I get rid of that, or do I minimize that? I see it across me. I can't see the screen because I'm still seeing the poll thing. How do I get rid of that? Well, I see now. I can't read the screen. Can you get rid of that share results thing? Kathy, Sally, no. Okay. What I might do is stop sharing the screen just for a second and then start again and see if I can get rid of that. Yeah, I've done it now. Let me start to share my screen again. All is well. Right. So I want to now talk through those poll results. So, as I've said, 95% of birth parents jointly registered their baby's birth on the birth certificate. Father's name is there. That's the same in all 4 countries of the UK. So then you might think these are birth parents, and as you'll know, gay couples, well, gay women can have 2 mothers can have their name on the birth certificate. So how common is that? How common? What percentage of births are registered to 2 mothers or 2 women? It's 0.1%. Now that's not 1%. That's 0.1%. So that's 1 in 1,000, right? Important, but very, very rare. And then you might think, well, what about these parents who are jointly registering the birth? Hasn't the mum got likely to have a partner who's not the biological father of the infant? And the answer is no. Fewer than 2% of women have a new male partner cohabiting or non-cohabiting, who is not their baby's biological father. So these kind of myths, they sort of need a bit of myth busting around this. Most of these men and women are the biological parents, and it's 95%. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. What do we know about the 5% of births that are registered to one parent only? Well, even among the 5% where the mother says, you know, we're not, or we're no longer in a relationship, 10% of the fathers attend the birth, even in that group, and 25% of the fathers, that's a quarter, are still in touch with the infant and mother 9 months later. So we've said there are 95% where it's jointly registered. There are 95% who say they're in a relationship. Among the 5% where the mum says, no, we're not in a relationship, or we aren't any longer at the time of the birth, most of the fathers are still, not most, but a lot of those fathers are still engaged. Then you might think, well, what about, whenever I'm in a room usually and they start to talk about fathers, particularly in social care, someone will come up with a story of some father that they know on the housing estate they work in who's had children with 6 mothers. And the impression is given that this is really very common. It's vanishingly rare. In only 2.1% of families does the father or the mother already have a child with another partner. So mostly when if you're thinking about these so-called single mothers who are not cohabiting with the father, very few of those men have got any other children. It's just this one. Now let's look at relationship instability. The last time I presented these kind of results, I got an email from somebody later saying it was really interesting to know how many are together at the birth, but I think she said, that they all, they break down, families break down very quickly afterwards. I'd really like to know that data. Well, I never said that families break down quickly later. She was trying to square it with her idea that she was dealing with single moms. Yeah. So obviously she had this data presented to her, which shocked her, all the fathers were there basically. And then she had to think, well, why am I thinking I see all these single moms? Well, it must be that they separate very quickly, and Adrienne must have said that, and I must have missed it, but it's not the case. So here we have data from the Millennium Cohort Study. So where the parents had been cohabiting at the time of the birth, 5.5% had separated by child age 3. That's over the first few years. Family breakdown is quite slow, actually. It doesn't, there's not a great rush in it, and that's an interesting bit of data. And then you had a converse movement where the parents had been living separately at the time of the birth. 25% had moved in together by infant age 9 months. So there's this kind of coming and going business. Then you have to think about, well, another thing services say to us, well, I can't talk to the mother about the father because, I don't think they get on. Yeah? So if you look at these mothers, and we're talking about mothers in the first year after the birth, 36.4% say that their relationship with the father of their baby is friendly. 10% of the non-cohabiting mothers say their relationship with the father of the baby is bad or fairly bad. It's 1 in 10. The rest of them, it's okay, it's workable. We don't talk much about, so you got just over a third, it's really good. 10% it's really not good, and the rest of it, it's okay. So what that means for professional is you don't have to feel embarrassed talking to the mother, so you're going to upset her. Mostly she'd be perfectly fine in talking about the father of her infant, and if not, then that's a real marker of risk, and you need to know about it. I also want to do this absent fatherhood thing. Over the years, we've been using the term single mothers and non-resident fathers, right? But these so-called single mothers, lots of them are as we've seen already, are in a close relationship with the father of the baby and are co-parenting. So they're not single mothers as such. They're mothers living in their own household, which we tend to call them at the Fatherhood Institute because it's easier for us to think about them if we talk about them as own household mothers and own household fathers. They're living their own household. They may be an own household mother who has sole care of her children, majority care, equal care, minority care, So we wanted to make clear to you when parents do separate, and so we've taken this figure that we had on the last slide, where 5.5% of parents had separated, they had been living together, they'd separated by child age 3. What was going on with the dads? Well, over 90% were seeing the young child regularly, right? So they weren't absent. And then we go to a very large survey. I love this survey. It's an interesting one. It was of families in children's centres in 2012 in some of the most highly disadvantaged areas in England. They actually got into 5,717 homes and interviewed them on the spot. So they're in there. Out of that 5,717 families, there were only 250 fathers, that's 4% of the whole, who were not seeing their baby regularly. So about 80% of the couples were living together, but 20% weren't. Most of those fathers all, were seeing their baby regularly. So I've really labored this point because we have to get round this idea that the fathers are not in the households, and if they aren't in the households, they're not there, they're really absent. Because until we get that, we see fathers as a kind of minority activity. We don't really accept that they're there, and that if we don't engage with them, we're causing problems. Because if we don't engage with them to help them support mothers, that's problematic. If we don't engage with problematic fathers, that's problematic. And they're all there, and we should be engaging with them. One on intimate partner violence. Now, there's, every act of violence, is appalling, but we have a lot of the people we work with, service providers, say, oh, I'm sure they're violent. Most fathers are violent here. So let's just look at the data. So in the year after the birth, among all mothers, that's including the non-cohabiting mothers, the percentage who ever experienced use of force in the relationship. 2 different studies, 3.6%, that's Millennium Cohort Study, and 2% is that big children's centre survey I mentioned in the last one. And where the couple are not living together, so these tend to be the most vulnerable mothers and the most disadvantaged families, clearly, 5.1% of the non-cohabiting mothers report ever experiencing use of force during the relationship, not necessarily in that year, but ever. I think ever is a very important question because even when violence may not be happening now, the fact that it has ever taken place is a powerful impact and keeps the mother constrained. But I just want you to look again at those figures, 5.1% of the non-cohabiting mothers, and among mothers overall, 3.6% in one study and 2% in the more recent study. Okay, now I want to look a bit at focus the rest of the presentation on 2 things. Firstly, a father's impact, because I think we now know they're all there. So we now have to know, well, what kind of impact are they having an impact? If they're not having an impact, well, let's forget about them. And I want to look at that, and then I want to look at the way services engage with them. So thinking in the antenatal period, father's depression has been quite seriously studied in the UK. In the antenatal and postnatal depression, there's a lot of data on it. It doesn't mean that father's depression is the most important thing. It doesn't. I mean, like his use of violence would be more important. His alcohol use, probably more prevalent than his depression, also significant when it's bad. But depression so I'm going to talk about depression, not because it's the most important thing, but because it has been studied. So father's impact from antenatal depression. I was really surprised. I thought, well, what's the father's depression during the pregnancy got to do with child outcomes. I thought he hasn't even met the child. I mean, it's not even born. And then you find that really good research that has tracked father's depression antenatally and postnatally and so on, but antenatally. And sometimes they're only depressed antenatally. They're not depressed afterwards at all. So they tracked the antenatal depression and looked at child outcomes. Antenatal, remember, he's never met the baby. So father's depression during the pregnancy is linked with more emotional, conduct and total health problems in their children later on. And that's controlling for, taking account of whether he continues to be depressed, so ruling that out, looking at the mother's depression, ruling that out. They're able to find this link between his depression during the pregnancy and problems with the kids later. Attention difficulties, attention deficit disorder and so on is important there. And behavioral, emotional and psychiatric problems, especially in boys and through to age 7. So that's the impact of his antenatal depression. Well, how does that work out? I asked myself. So why are the risks to children from their father's antenatal depression? So first of all, you think, well, are there genetic risks? Is it heritable? Are they transmitted genetically? Depressive disorders aren't so strongly heritable, so very little of that, we think. But what's important is that when the expectant fathers were depressed, the couple argued more, and their conflict was independently linked with their child's later difficulties. The father's depression may cause or exacerbate mother's emotional difficulties, and expectant mother's stress, anxiety, and depression can have long-term effects on child outcomes, possibly through fetal programming. And also, of course, the father's poor mental health can affect their employment, for example, and this can cause financial, housing, food instability, So what we're looking at is this interconnectedness, and some of these fathers aren't even living with the mother. The risks to the child in the longer term via the mother, largely in the antenatal period, are profound, and that's why we can't ignore the fathers, because they're having an influence whether we like it or not. So let's do a brief one on how services engage with fathers in the antenatal period. We don't have very good data on that. A lot of old data from around 2000, which paints a pretty depressing picture. So we ran a survey, which is not totally representative, but it's not unrepresentative. It's pretty good. And we asked the fathers about their experiences in routine antenatal appointments. 29% they had said they had rarely or never been spoken directly. Some aren't even provided with a chair. 56% said they had rarely or never been addressed by name. And 29% said they'd been encouraged to ask questions. So that's just under a third. And we know from other research that they'll tend to be the better off dads. Staff are more positive with better off dads. Same with mums. They're more positive with better off mums as well. Then we asked about attending ultrasound scans, and almost all fathers go to the ultrasound scans, well over 90%. 28% said they'd been encouraged to ask questions. So again, it's a picture of pretty low engagement. At the birth, interestingly, 42% of the fathers said they'd been encouraged to ask questions. And one nice little study which asked fathers about their experience before the birth, during the birth, and after the birth, found the men reporting far greater support and acknowledgement from healthcare practitioners during the birth than before or afterwards. And we think that's because over 90% of the fathers have been at the birth since 1990. That's more than 30 years. Over 90%. We haven't got the recent data. I'm told it's 96%. I don't know. It will be over 90%, given that it was 90% 30 years ago. So I suspect that healthcare with the midwives are starting to see fathers around the birth is very common, and also perhaps as a useful pair of hands in staff shortages. So that the fathers are having the best engagement with the fathers, and it's not great, is at the birth. Okay, now let's look at fathers in the first year after the birth. Now, one of the most interesting things we have learned about fathers in the last 20 years has been from a big body of research on the physiological changes that happen to men in their bodies and their brains when they are engaged with, take care of, live with a pregnant woman, take care of infants. What happens to their bodies? Because we knew a long time ago that mothers' bodies change, because of course they're pregnant, biological mothers are pregnant and giving birth. We also knew from the research that adoptive mothers had big physiological changes in their bodies, which of course were not caused by being pregnant or giving birth, but were caused by caretaking. And then the researchers started thinking, oh, that's interesting. What about men? And so 20 years ago, they started this research. They began it before that a little bit with non-human primates, some kinds of monkeys, with little voles, prairie voles, where the father does a lot, with rats, interestingly. And they found physiological changes both in the bodies and the brains of these animals that did a lot for caretaking. And so the hormones change. The big thing that happens in men's bodies is testosterone drops dramatically, about 30%. It drops in men who co-reside with the pregnant female to start with. I mean, that's before the baby's even born. This is nature's way, of course, of making human males not a risk to infants. And it stays down. And what happens is the testosterone goes, I don't know whether it's chased out by the what they call the love hormones, or whether the love hormone, where they push it out, where the testosterone leaves and the love hormones come in. I don't know, of course. I know nothing about this. All I know is that the hormonal balances shift, and you'll be able to see this on the more detail if you want to look back at the presentation. And you'll see that there are various kinds that change the men's bodies. So the more skin on skin they do, the more changing of nappies, the more gazing and mutual gaze into the infant's eyes, the more they connect with the infant before it's born, listening, speaking to the baby in the womb. These are the things. I mean, it changes in them all, but it changes in them most when they do those kind of things. And similarly, there's neuroplasticity in brain structure. So men's and women's brains, different neural pathways are forged, different things happen, things light up when they're looking at and caring for infants. And again, the more the fathers do, the more this happens. And it's the same with the mothers. So their adjustment to fatherhood is physiological as well as psychological and practical and everything. There's a great deal of pathologizing of mothers and fathers, I think, around the birth. As, we all want to raise money for mental health and stuff. And so we spend an awful lot of time talking about this, all the terrible PTSD and mental health that women and men, experience. And often with greatly exaggerated figures, I'm glad to say. We don't want them to be all completely suffering. So I have had a look, at the adjustment research in the UK. And so here's the first one. Men's happiness, like women's, increases during the antenatal period and in the year after the birth. By the time women are going to carry a baby to term, a woman is going to carry a baby to term, her partner, who is usually there, is as happy and excited as she is. And they know they are both embarking on the hugest journey of their life, probably. And so their happiness actually increases despite the lack of sleep and despite all the other things. They're happier. 91% of men say they actually feel more fulfilled because they have become a father. I mean, hardly any of them, like 3% or something, can't think of anything positive to say about becoming a dad. It's hardly any. But 91%, most of them are very positive, and 91% you can say they feel more fulfilled. It's taking them to the next stage of their lives, the next stage of their human development. So what about post-birth PTSD? Are they all traumatized by attending the birth? These 90+% fathers who are now at the birth? No. Most recent meta-analysis found 1.2%. It's very rare, and I'm amazed it's so low, but really the studies do show this. I mean, when you think how many births are traumatic, I'm amazed it's so low. I'm not sure, because I haven't read the main studies, because you can't, whether they just include live births. I suspect they do. Father's postnatal depression, I think I mentioned earlier, is about 4%. If you look in Bringing Baby Home, you'll see the section on this where we pull all the studies to the front and discuss them all and show what the percentages are. They're lower than 4%. I'm just being a bit generous here. There are other struggles, anxiety, stress, but that's so it's not that it's only depression that's 4%, but still the other things, though they're more, anxiety is not more prevalent. Stress is, feeling stressed, often because they've got no money, no housing is terrible, so stresses are higher, but they're not depression. They're things that can be alleviated if we change the circumstances. So 11.3% report difficulties adjusting to fatherhood. And people often ask me, is that because they're jealous of the baby breastfeeding and things like that? No. Primarily due, as mothers will tell you, to lack of sleep. And this is not so much with mothers, this is the big thing for dads. They report difficulties adjusting to fatherhood because they feel they don't have enough time to spend with their infant. So it's not having too much time, it's not having enough time. I mentioned that stress in new fathers could be very severe. 17.1% have felt so stressed at some point in the first year that they fear that stress might damage their infant. We don't know what that's. What we do, we know it's related to work pressures. We know it's related to unemployment. We know it's related to housing, food instability, and so on. So now, finishing off, I want to just think briefly about father's impact again. We did those 2 slides where we looked at the impact of the father's antenatal depression, because we're interested to see how that could have long-term impacts on children. Now we're going to look at the early behaviour. So the baby's born, and we're looking at early caregiving or play 3 to 6 months, actually 8 weeks. Some of the measures are taken at 8 weeks. When the father's early caregiving or play, and as you'll know with very small babies, caregiving and play are very much connected as you change a nappy and poke a tummy. When the father's early caregiving or play was frequent and regular, was positive in tone, engaged and active. So when the father's early caregiving or play had been like that, then their 2-year-olds showed better cognitive development. Their brains have developed better. And they display fewer behavior problems at age 2. So what it really matters, how the fathers interact just in those first few weeks, matters for the infant's development. Conversely, toddler problems in these 2-year-olds are greater when their father was disengaged, remote, or critical in face-to-face interaction with them early on. If the fathers talk critically, say critical things about the baby, it's the same with the mothers. Those parents who make critical observations about the baby, that's a big indicator. And as health visitors should be looking at that in both parents. So you really do need to see the father, talk to the father about the infant. If he's making lots of critical comments, this is a sign for intervention, early intervention. So the father's early depression, I told you, earlier on that depression has been very studied, if not overstudied. But anyway, depression is also linked with poorer infant development, more problematic behavior in preschoolers. And what's so interesting is that this depression thing, which has been so extensively and sort of sensitively researched, so they've looked at the effects of the mother's depression, ruled those out, and so on. If that depression, early depression, postnatal, has even stronger impact than the prenatal depression on child development throughout the life course. Well, throughout the whole of childhood, more problematic behavior in preschoolers, greater risk of child psychiatric disorder in primary school, and lower educational achievement in secondary school. This is the father's early depression. We're talking in the first few months, and higher depression risk in daughters at age 18. So these fathers are, their state of mind as well as their behavior from the very beginning with their infants has long-term impact. And then again, there's thinking of these fathers and mothers as a triad. which we did in the antenatal depression bit, when we thought, when the father was depressed, the parents fought more, had higher conflict, and that was an independent risk. So 80% of new mothers identify their baby's father as their primary source of support. I can't tell you how often I've looked at projects which have tried to develop peer support for mothers with other mothers. Well, that's fine, and we should do what we can there. But hang on, the primary support person in most of these mothers' lives is the baby's father. And I'm not sure why, and I haven't seen one single project that looks at developing the father as a support for the mother. Again, showing you the triad. Mothers who feel criticized by their baby's father express more negativity towards their baby. Their mental health is poorer when she doesn't feel supported by her baby's father. And conversely, when the father feels positive about his relationship with the mother, infants tend to be more settled. So, father, and it'll work the other way as well, the father and mother feeling positive about their relationship will be associated with the child being more settled. And we think, they've done the way, looked at the research, that's a result of the rate. It's not that the child's more settled and therefore the parents feel more positive about their relationship with each other. It's that from the way they've done the research, it looks as if the child being settled follows on from a more positive relationship. So what about fathers and services in the postnatal year? I love this picture because you can see here the father and the health visitor and the baby, a lovely triangle of love and enjoyment. And the relaxation the father is feeling, the relaxation the health visitor is feeling. So what you get is some professionals who are just brilliant with the triad, as well as with the mum. And quite often the ones who are not very good with the mum are also not very good with the dad. That was an interesting thing. One research project was looking at adolescent mothers and fathers, and it found that where the father found the communication with the health visitor difficult, so did the mother. So we think very often it's just the interpersonal skills of the health visitor. So in home visits, 80% of fathers, and this is pre-COVID. These days, of course, a lot more fathers continuing to work from home, new fathers around much more. Even in previous times, and this is, almost 7 or 8 years ago, 88% of fathers had met a health visitor, had been there at one of the post-birth visits. But their experience depended on the practice of each individual healthcare practitioner. And so some describe positive encounters, but most, and this is really upsetting, as you see, there's lots of research on this, most fathers report feeling ignored, patronized, and considered unimportant in the postnatal visit, which is really awful because that's where they can be given lots of useful information which can help with breastfeeding, can help them bond, all kinds of things. 2 studies of health visitors found them not engaging with fathers. The first one, even when recognizing the benefits of doing so. And I have to say that I don't blame health visitors. There's nothing to do with individual health visitors. It's to do with their workload. It's to do with the expectation. It's to do with whether they feel skilled. So they can say, well, I know it would be good if I engage with them, but when health visitors, I don't know how to talk about football. Well, of course, it's not football you're talking about, is it? But the point being that the health visitors are not supported, even when they feel guilty that they're not engaged with the father, because they know it's good, they may not do it. And another one, and this is particularly worrying, that where the father was known to pose a threat to the mother and infant, which will probably be, in 3 to 4% of cases, that father, they're actively avoiding him. Now, I wouldn't blame them. I'd avoid him too, right? Because they haven't got any backup. But what that means is that mothers are left to manage risk. So wider services, I won't go into the detail. You can look at them on the, when the slide is up there. So basically, whether it's in breastfeeding, whether it's when mothers are admitted to a mother and baby unit, with purple psychosis, in NICUs, in all these specialist services, you see what you get from the more mainstream health visiting services, what you see as marginalization and exclusion. I want to finish on neonatal death and pregnancy loss. Now, when a baby dies, two parents, given that 95% of the fathers are there, at least, because some of the others may not be considered to be part of the couple, but we know they're still engaging. When a baby dies, or when there is pregnancy loss, there are two parents who are affected, not just a mother. And fathers commonly report being excluded during communication and information giving. And they find that when people do address them, they're regarded primarily as a supportive partner. So how can you help your wife? Rather than as a bereaved parent themselves. I just want to finish on a sad little story which cropped up in one of the many research projects I read, papers I read, when I was thinking about pregnancy loss and neonatal death and NICUs. And quite a lot of that research is qualitative. So the researchers interview the mothers and fathers and ask about their experiences. And this is what one father said. One father, remembering his experience in the NICU with his critically ill infant, said to the researcher, "I think when the nurse came to my wife and said, 'Kiss your baby, you mightn't see him again,' why didn't she say it to me as well?" Thank you for listening. Very happy to answer any questions as we move forward, but I'll stop sharing my screen right now.
What a huge amount of powerful data and argument. Thank you very, very much. And what a story to end on. We've got a few questions coming in already, which I will work through. And I would like to encourage anyone in the audience to ask your questions through the Q&A as well. I'm going to take a bit of chair's privilege and ask a question of my own first, Adrienne, which is about the last couple of years in the pandemic and how you think that might have changed some of the things you've been talking about today, for better or worse.
The lack of what? Sorry?
The pandemic and the COVID restrictions.
Change thing. Yes, well, Pregnant Then's Good have done this, and we also did a survey. Yes, well, we know that the fathers were excluded, often except during active labour. We had horrendous stories of fathers sitting in the car park while they forgot to call him in, and there's women giving birth alone. I mean, awfulness. Now, we all know that, right? So there were terribly awful things. A lot of stories when, and also the healthcare practitioners hating when they had to give bad news to a woman in a scan and the father's not there. They were very distressed. A lot of the staff. There were a few staff. We asked staff. Some said, "Oh, it was great not having the father there. We only had to talk to one person," right? But these were really the minority. My daughter had a baby during lockdown, and she said, "I said, how are the midwives and so on?" She said, "Mum, they want the fathers there," she said, "because they can see how unhappy we are, and they want a happy mother." Yeah. So I think all that was going on, and we know it was terrible. Now, research is starting to come out that shows that there were benefits, because during lockdown, for many fathers, not all, some were still going out, many new fathers, they were there for weeks, and so mothers saying, I wasn't left on my own after 2 weeks. He was working from home. He was upstairs, or he was in the kitchen, and even though we were crowded, he could pop out and change a nappy. I wasn't on my own. So maybe there were good things that came out. And as I said, I've just started to collate the papers on that. And it seems to me that I suspected that, I suspected that how much worse is it? I remember it myself, 2 weeks in and your partner goes and you're there alone all day. And that's terrible. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to work through some of the Q&A. So there's a couple of questions about the data that you've used. So one says who's been asked and how much of these poll results or national data. And the second linked one is it possible to get the references that support your slides?
Yes. So if you go onto our web, so you've got the slides, you'll have those, you go onto our website and you can download or look at the PDF of Bringing Baby Home. The main report. There's thousands of references. Everything is in full. Yeah. And there's also great discussion about the methodology. So mostly we only used big national, or by national I mean all 4 countries, or sometimes a countrywide, as in the Children's Centre survey, the big Children's Centre survey. We used these big quantitative surveys. I'm not keen on using self-selecting online surveys. You know, I saw one the other day that said that 1/3 of mothers found birth traumatic, and I thought, now that's ridiculous. I don't believe that. I thought. So I looked then at the sample, and it was mothers were invited to tell us if they'd had traumatic births, right? So 1/3 of them, strongly motivated, had told us, right? So we don't go for that sort of thing. When I refer to as qualitative studies, and I mean it was a few parents, but they were interviewed in depth, I'll say that in the report. Mostly they are the big West of England study, which is called the A1 Longitudinal Study of Parents and Children, which is going to this day, which began in 1990. The Millennium Cohort Study, which began in the year 2000. Growing Up in Scotland, which had cohorts in 2005 and 2011. We are part of a big project now trying to get another birth cohort. So some of this data is quite old, but for example, some of them, there are other surveys which are more recent. It's all there, and I'm very, very clear about whether I think the data is representative or not.
That's really helpful, thank you. There's a related, you just mentioned about the age of some of the data. Val has asked, do you have a sense that fathers' levels of engagement are the same or have got worse?
Oh, no, they're much better. Right. No, not getting another thing that's happened. You won't believe this, but the National Crime Survey, I haven't put it in this report, is showing that, you know, partner violence is going down. You know, I know we don't hear that because we hear a lot of where people are trying to raise money for domestic violence, and that's perfectly understandable. But when you look at the actual data, no, fathers' engagement is going up. So that anything that I'm quoting that was based in the year 2000, you can bet your bottom dollar there's a higher percentage of fathers highly engaged now. And the reason is quite simple. 2012 was the peak time for babies not born to cohabiting couples. Yeah, right. That's been going down over time because people teenage pregnancies way down from the way it was in 2005. The ONS have studied from 2005 to 2020. Teenage pregnancy, the most unstable. Relationships most unstable. There's fewer of those. The age at first birth has been going up, continues to go up year on year for mothers and fathers. So people are having babies in a more stable and relationship when both of them and of course birth control is much better. So you take the morning after pill if you don't intend to carry the baby to term with your partner. Most women do that. So what you're seeing now is fathers have never been mainly absent. They've been single mothers, but that didn't mean that the fathers weren't part of the picture. But yes, definitely greater engagement. Also, I didn't put in this slide, but it's in the report. When you look at the engagement of fathers in terms of nappy changing, bathing, getting up to the baby at night, I mean, it's incredible, the change. We've got the data from 1959. Upwards, we don't have any data post the Growing Up in Scotland, and so I don't have. No, we have a bit because we had through some big surveys. Yeah, I mean the fathers, they're all hands-on. I mean, everyone says to me, "Oh, my husband, you know, my son-in-law, he's so engaged." You know, and they're right. They're seeing these pictures, and they're correct.
Thank you. So there's a question here about partner violence. It said you had statistics in your slides about partner violence. Do you know anything about other forms of domestic abuse such as coercive control?
Yeah. So I only just put in that because every study asks the questions differently. You know, so I just took a few studies where they had asked the same question because I wanted to look and see which was the use of what a force in the relationship. But in the report, you find a lot more detail on psychological control, you know, as well. And again, look, the figures are not high. I mean, I'm sort of sorry to say this in a way. I'm glad to say this. I'm thrilled to say it, because I don't want a lot of women to be being beaten up or heavily controlled by vicious partners. Yeah. But I'm also, in a way, sorry, because people have to think again. That's not, and also because it makes it sound as if I don't care, because, you know, only 4 or 5% or whatever it is, 3%, 2.8%. I do. I think every single act. But I think the good thing about really knowing how rare it is that we don't have to feel that the services will be overloaded. If we spot it, we can do something about it. We should be able to. You know, we don't have to think, oh God, it's a fifth of all families. You know, how are we going to get these men onto behavior change program? How are we going to get these mothers protected? You know, it ain't that many families.
Thank you, Adrienne. We've got a couple of questions from Caroline around fathers being offered support, and whether there is something around fathers being at work, and how that impacts on them being able to access support services.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I was really surprised at that stat that 88, this is from several years ago, 88% of fathers had met a health visitor at home. You know, they had been there. So I think the work thing's a tricky thing. We often get told, you know, oh, well, we can't work with the fathers because they're at work. Yes. So I came across an amazing CAMS, you know, child and family mental health, you know, adolescent mental health service, in one place where they're engaging so many fathers and father figures. I can't tell you. It was like 50% of the people there, at least, were men. And and I sort of said, how do you do this? Because they didn't realize they were doing something unusual. And they kind of looked at me as if I was out of my mind and said, well, of course we've got the net, because how can we help the adolescent, you know, or the child who's in distress if we don't see all the important people in the child's life? So when I tried to find out what they did, because I hadn't charted it down, I hadn't written it up, it was just a bald figure. And what they were doing was, well, everybody on the team believed it was really important. So they tried to set up appointments when both parents could be there. When a parent didn't turn up, male or female, they contacted them and pursued them and said, when can we see you? So it was that kind of little stuff. And they found that if you gave people a name, quite often they could make the time. You know, people can work flexibly quite often. People work shifts. A lot of people don't work 9 to 5. So I suppose over the time we've learned that if you might have to offer some appointments outside normal hours, but if you offer them, you may not need to use them much, because so depends on the support. I think a lot of support can be done online. Yeah, there's a lot. We have got some great programs. You know, you can do stuff. You don't have to. It's great to see them in person, but sometimes you do a hybrid model where you see them in person a bit, but then there's a lot of work that happens in their own time. So I think there's ways that when the work thing shouldn't be a barrier. It's an issue, but it shouldn't stop us.
Yeah, I'm always interested in that as a working mum, because, you know, mums are working often during pregnancy. For all of our children's appointments, often mums go back to work, so somebody has to take time off for all of those children's health appointments for the rest of the child's life that are not arranged around our working day. So this assumption that dads in particular in the perinatal period have an issue taking time off work, it's an issue for all of us for most of our lives, isn't it?
It is
balancing work and health appointments. So yeah,
it
interesting.
is. But it is the most, it's good, interesting it's raised, because it is the most common thing raised by professionals who wouldn't raise it with a mother. They'd expect her to be there. Yeah. And as you say, loads of these mothers are working, but they will just say, oh, well, the father, you know, they're all working, we can't get them.
Yeah, interesting. So we've got 2 last questions before we wrap up. I'm going to put these together because they're similar. One is about best practice in terms of health visitors getting it right and engaging dads. And then another one about best practice in engaging fathers in research. So 2 different sorts of best practice, but if you could just end on those positive notes and inspire us by what good looks like, Adrienne.
Yeah, so let's start with the fathers in research. That was assumed to be a problem. It often still is, But we have done a lot of, and sometimes it isn't at all a problem. And very often it's the way the questions are framed. It's the way they invite people to participate. So if they invite parents, then it's mainly mothers. If they invite fathers and mothers, then it's far more fathers. You have to have extra resources, engaging fathers in research, because you might need to pursue them a bit harder, but not hugely extra. A lot of it is very subtle stuff. And there was some brilliant work done at Bristol University. I think it's called, it's called conversation analysis, where they tape recorded a researcher ringing up and speaking to a parent and asking various questions. This could work in research or for help in practice, and then asking if they could speak to the other parent. Either they're there now or, get details from them and speak back. And they found that when they did the analysis, it was the way the professional asked the question. If there was a kind of, I'm sure they're underneath, they were thinking, the mum will say no and I'll never get to speak to the father. Then she said no, right? So there's a lot of stuff around engaging fathers in research that it needs very subtle analysis, and some projects have been incredibly successful in engaging fathers. So that was fathers in research. What was the other one, Sally?
Health visiting practice.
Health visiting, yes. So there's a Grantham. This is a little story. Grantham, this is some years ago, they don't do it now, I have to say. One of those things that fell by the wayside. They had this nice little project where they were at that time contacting couples with a letter first, right? Or contacting the family with a letter first to introduce themselves as a health visiting team. These days it could be done by phone but anyway, it was a letter. And they had their own usual letter, which was dear parents, yes, plural, dear parents, congratulations on becoming parents, blah, blah, blah. We are your health visiting team. We will be contacting you to arrange an appointment to come to see you. And then they created a new letter which said, dear mum and dad. It said, same letter, but at the end it said, we'll be contacting you and hope to fix an appointment where we can see you both. Yeah, that was the change. Now, what happened was that with the normal letter, and then they sent out to 10 families, got the normal letter, 10 or 11 families, and another 10 or 11 families got the new letter, randomly sent out. Yeah. And what they found was that where they used the old letter, about 20% of the fathers were there, did come. And when they used the adjusted letter, 70% came. Yeah. So often it's just a matter of inviting them in. But when I say just, it's not necessarily a simple thing, because the whole team has to understand why you're doing that. It's like the team who were the CAMs, they all believed you couldn't serve the children until you knew the parents. So, that buy-in has to be there in the team. And then you will look at all kinds of little ways that you can adjust your practice and invite them in. And you won't see them all, but you'll see loads.
For a fascinating presentation and discussion, and thanks to everyone who's joined us today as well. It's been lovely to see you, and thanks again, Adrienne. Bye-bye.
Bye, it's been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us. Bye.